Here are two stories. Both take place in the Rocky Mountain region. We don't like to camp on campgrounds because we're antisocial, and none of us care to share a campground with a stranger screaming kids waving around their flaming hot small pokers. When we go camping, we do mild off-road and camping clearings away from the people. Just after high school, me and my friends decided to celebrate by going out on a camping trip. We ended up leaving way later than we had planned. It was dark by the time we got up into the mountains, and the camping spot was about an hour or so from home. We didn't want to turn around, so we just decided to make do and set up camp in the first decent clearing that we found. We would figure things out in the morning. We all set up our tents in the dark, moonless night, then just went straight to bed. When we woke up, we realized that we had unwittingly set up camp on top of someone's abandoned attempt at a marijuana farm. Not wanting to deal with that, we packed up pretty quickly and moved on. The second incident happened a few years later with the same group of friends. We set up camp in a little clearing surrounded by thick trees and settled around a campfire for the night. After it gets dark, we hear rustling in the trees and occasionally catch a flash of campfire reflecting off the ice and the disc. We are worried. This is bear country, and this particular area is covered in deer. We had to stop a few times on the drive to this spot. The lady across the road noticed tons of hoof prints and deer trails near our camping site while we were setting up. We go to bed, and all night long we hear the snapping of twigs and leaves. They sound like they're coming near the campsite a few times, but then back off. The dog starts barking. The next morning we notice that there are fresh cougar prints skirting around the edge of our campsite. It's pretty obvious the cougar was circling us all night, sizing us up. We're dumb young adults and decided to test our luck, so we stayed a second night. That second night, we decided to take shifts sleeping, with a few of us staying up to watch on guard, with our shotgun ready and keep our fire tended during the night. My ex and I had the first half of the night. Occasionally, we would see a yellow flash of eyes for a brief moment, and they'd disappear again. The dogs would not shut up. Maybe it's just paranoia settling in, but my ex swears he saw the cougar off in the trees. At this point, we all decide enough of testing fate and slept in our cars and left the next morning. Next morning rolls around, and our friend takes the dogs out for a small hike and one last potty break while he brewed some coffee. On our way back down the trail, they notice cougar tracks following theirs. I'm all convinced we're being stalked. We decide to forget about coffee, tear down camp as quickly as possible, and nope out of there. In college, I worked a late afternoon shift from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. as a security guard at a chemical factory. On Sundays, I don't know what kind of chemicals they made, but it was comprised of 3 buildings, and its prior use was just an orange juice factory. It was cool, and the guy who would replace me at 11 was this big 6'3" guy. He would sometimes get dropped off early, and we would just chill and talk. Well, I had to walk the property at 10:30 p.m. Every time I walked, I had no problems. Here's the thing. Of the 3 buildings, 2 were for actually mixing, heating, and emulsification, and 1 building had administrative offices. That administrative office was always closed since it was the weekend. One time, this guy gets dropped off at 10:15, and he decides to walk with me at 10:30. So the administrative building is last, and we're walking towards it, and everything is off. So we circled the building, and as we're walking back, the office light turns on. This was the first time I'd ever seen this since no one is supposed to be there. I pull out my keys and start walking towards the building to enter and see if someone is inside. At this point, the guy looks at me, grabs my arm and says, "Don't go in there, just leave it." I turn and look at him, and his face looks dead serious. He's looking right at me like he's seen a ghost. You've got to realize I'm 19 years old, still a kid inside, really, and not afraid of anything. But looking at his face made me nope the hell out of there. When we got back to the guard shack, he told me that once on his walks at around 3 a.m., the same thing happened. He went in, and the office felt really cold. He turned off the light, and as he left the building, it turned on again. He re-enters, as he's about to turn it off, and he said something pushes him from behind. Immediately, he turns around and exits the building, and tells me he'll never step foot in it again. I talked to one of the old workers there about it, and he said that when the place was a juice factory, the building housed a larger juicer and someone had an accident and died. I don't know if it's true, but the old worker told me he would never go in that building at night either. A few weeks later, I quit, so that I would never have to deal with that again. In early 2017, I had just moved to a large city in the southwest US that enjoys a fair amount of violent and property crime. I'm a skinny white male in my mid to late 20s, not exactly a hardened warrior, but I was just trying my best to adjust to this harsh environment. My girlfriend's parents at the time had just bought a house in a quiet neighborhood for her and me to live in. Most of the houses in the area had bars on the windows and doors to prevent burglary. The previous owners had removed the bars from our house prior to selling it, probably because they thought the bars would lower the home's value due to a perception of danger. This meant we were the only house in the neighborhood with exposed windows and doors. Plus, the house was on a corner next to a road that led straight to a main road, so in the event of a burglary, the getaway would be rather simple. My ex and I were in the habit of going to a fast food joint every day for lunch before she went to work. We left the house one day and got in the car on our way to get lunch, and I happened to glance over and notice a man standing on the corner across the street. He's moving erratically, as if waiting eagerly, and seems to be staring directly at us. He's Hispanic, mid-20s, probably with a fresh fade haircut, long shorts, and a shirt that's way oversized. The sort of clothes that make you think, maybe this guy is accustomed to doing crimes. I say to my ex, let's not go anywhere, let's go back in. Once back inside, I explained to her my thought process. That dude on the corner looks like he's staking the place out for a robbery, waiting for us to leave. My mind starts racing, and I go into emergency freakout mode. I go downstairs into the basement where a narrow window overlooks the street. I can see the corner where he's standing, and he's no longer there. I see he has crossed the street and is now leaning against a fence diagonal from our house, looking straight at the house. He looks agitated, like he's a little pissed off we haven't left. It looks like he thinks we've just gone in for a second, then we'll be leaving again soon, so he's waiting. I think he must be very stupid to think he's inconspicuous, standing right there, looking all antsy. I called a non-emergency police number, and it takes several minutes for them to answer. When they finally pick up, I explain my concern, and to my surprise, they take it pretty seriously. She asks for a description, and if he appears to be on drugs. I note that he appears to be on some kind of stimulant based on his agitated and antsy gestures. The operator tells me they'll send an officer to check him out, and that is the end of the call. I look out the window, and he's gone. Since I feel my house is being actively scoped out for an invasion, and I have several collectible things and a dorm-like cat, I want to do everything I can to prevent that. I go outside since I'm new to the neighborhood and suddenly scared. It seems like it's a great time to introduce myself to the neighbors. I see a guy pull up in a truck across the street on the corner where I initially saw the creep, so I walk over towards him. As I'm approaching his truck, I see the creep coming down the street towards me. It appears he had taken a stroll around the block and was looping back. I approached the man exiting his truck and introduced myself. He wasn't the neighbor, but some local delivery guy. Crap. I start walking back to my house, and somehow the creep isn't walking very fast behind me. I'm not exactly sure what to do, but I want to show a strong presence of guardianship. I turn on the water hose in the front yard and start watering the bushes. The creep is slowly slinking by on the sidewalk, looking at me. I look at him and ask, "How's it going, man?" He stops on the sidewalk directly in front of the house, looks at me and says, "Good." I say, "Just so you know, gonna be here all day." I was working from home at the time, so this was true. "Oh yeah?" he says, and steps into the yard a bit. His body language isn't exactly aggressive. It's just like we're having a normal conversation, which is disturbing to me. The fact that he's so calm and engaging me is unsettling, like he isn't intimidated that I'm calling him out. Since he stepped onto the yard a bit, I sort of point around his feet and say, That's private property. At that point, he appears to take the hint and continues walking down the street. After he's out of sight, I knock on some doors on my block, introduce myself, and explain the situation. I think my instincts definitely kicked in, and any shyness or fear of awkward intrusions was totally demolished by my drive to survive. I met an old lady across the street, weak but potentially helpful as a lookout. I continued down the street and spotted a middle-aged Hispanic man talking with a middle-aged white male guy with a long gray beard. I approached them, introduced myself, and asked them if they noticed a creepy guy walking around. Turns out they did. That's what they were discussing. The Hispanic male, Dan, told me that he knew where the guy lived and asked if I wanted to get into his truck and drive by his apartment. I agreed and jumped into his truck, nearly sitting on top of a pistol that was laying on the passenger seat. Yep, he was armed, which was actually a bit of a relief as I'm not a gun person at all. We drove a few blocks down to the end of the street, and he pointed out what he suspected was the creep's apartment. Sure enough, the creep was leaning against a wall, wearing totally different clothes. Being a criminal mastermind, he decided to run home and change outfits to not arouse suspicion. He didn't seem to notice us drive by. Dan said that he brought his gun in case he felt like scaring the creep. He was a pretty ballsy guy. Apparently, he'd seen that guy walking up and down our street earlier in the day. One of the neighbors reported to Dan that the creep was peering into his nephew's truck, which was parked on the street, and Dan had to scare him away. But the creep continued walking up and down the street as if plotting something. We drove back towards our homes and he dropped me off. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to keep an eye out. During my discussion with the neighbors, I had also met a proactive young man who lived on the street and claimed to have seen the creep. We also exchanged numbers. I was beginning to form a sort of neighborhood local watch, and it felt pretty cool, but I was still scared. I'd had some fantasies crossing my mind, like what if this guy was part of a larger gang, and he's just a scout? I felt like my girlfriend and I were in danger. All the while, my ex is in the house getting ready for work. I'm afraid that when she leaves, I'll be home alone. It'll be dark, and this terrifying person will come into the house armed. I continue to pace around, checking the windows every few minutes for any sight of him. I look out the window, and he's standing in the street directly in front of the house, looking directly towards us. Oh gosh, he's threatening me. He thought about what I said earlier about this being private property, and he's blatantly testing me. So I call the cops again, explain the situation, and that he's standing right in front of my house in a very aggressive gesture, as a sort of psychological attack. Again, the operator is really understanding, and says they'll send someone to talk to him. He disappears. I continue pacing the house, looking out the windows, and I see him walk back and forth down the street, seemingly doing more laps of the block. Finally, 2 police officers show up. I can see through the window that they stopped him a bit down the street and are talking to him. I can also see Dan has stopped his truck nearby and is speaking with him as well. But there's no way I'm going out there to speak to them while he's there. I watch, and at some point, the creep retreats back to his apartment. They let him go. I guess they didn't have anything on him as he hadn't broken any laws, so he was free to roam. I walk out to speak with the cops and tell them I'm the one that called and that I don't feel safe. They explained that the guy appeared to be high, said that he had smoked some synthetic weed, and that he appeared to be hearing voices. This was kind of a relief because I thought he was some sort of cunning professional criminal, not a dumbass. But nonetheless, I still didn't feel safe. The cops explained they can't do anything unless he's actively trespassing or doing some crime. I'm glad they at least spoke to him and figured that would dissuade him from continuing to creep around the block, which it did. I spoke to Dan after the cops left, and he mentioned how the creep was saying, "I want that truck," to the cops. I couldn't believe I didn't realize it before. This whole time, I thought he wanted something in my house. But he was really interested in Dan's nephew's red truck parked on the street, which was standing in front of my house. I think he was trying to maintain distance from Dan's house because he has a gun. Even still, my adrenaline glands had been through the ringer that day, and I was pretty much in a state of high tension for the rest of the night. A friend came over to hang out, completely out of sympathy, so that I wasn't alone and terrified. It might not sound that scary to you, but the feeling that this individual was targeting me, and then the feeling that he was threatening me personally after I engaged him, was highly disturbing. Either way, my vigilance and paranoid nature ended up helping out my neighborhood and strengthening the bonds between the people who lived around me. I got out of the city, and I'm back in the calm, liberal city where most of the criminals are the people who don't pick up their dog poop at the park and fart in yoga classes. I live by a small river, and my friend and I always spoke about putting a boat on it one night and just letting the current take us downstream while we fished all night. Well, a few years ago, we finally did it. We loaded up the boat with our fishing poles and a case of beer and headed out around 10 p.m. We put the boat in the river, and my friend's girlfriend drove the truck home. The trip was only about 4 miles in a straight line, but with the curves of the river, it was doubling back on itself. The actual trip was more like 15 miles. We had been told it would take about 6 hours, so we got to the river around midnight and expected to be home before 7 a.m. The river was really low that night, but we didn't expect it to be an issue, so we shoved off. The first few hours passed pretty normally, and we caught a few fish. But then, we passed a cutoff, and the river current just slowed to a halt. Around 2 a.m., we heard this faint groaning noise off in the distance. We didn't think much of it at first because we are both campers, and were used to the forest noises. As we kept moving slowly down the river, the groaning noises kept happening, and it was getting louder. I can't even really accurately describe the noise itself. It was a very throaty groan/moaning sound with a short duration. I say it was like a zombie noise, but it was very distinct, and at times it sounded like a man groaning in pain. For the next half hour, the noise grew louder until it felt like it was literally just out of sight on land, and it was loud. So I mentioned the river was really low. Well, at this point in our trip, the river walls were nearly vertical and 10 feet high. This sound was at its loudest right now. But as we went down the river, it didn't get any quieter. We weren't moving past the groaning. It was following us in the darkness of the forest. We were both getting weirded out about it, and being assholes, we were amplifying the situation by coming up with all kinds of scary things that it could be. It's a zombie or a dying man trying to yell for help, a banshee, a ghost. But could it be a serial killer messing with us? Maybe it's a siren trying to lure us off course. As it neared 3 a.m., we were way behind schedule. To say I'm on edge is an understatement. I was trying to play it cool because my friend was playing it cool, and I didn't want him thinking that I'm a big baby. We were shining our flashlights into the forest and watching as things scurried off in the darkness as the light hit them. The groaning was still going on. The loud groaning happened about once a minute, and there was a quieter, slightly different sound that happened in between. The sound was finally behind us, but it wasn't getting much quieter. With the sound behind us, we figured we were in the clear, or we weren't so lucky. About 5 minutes later, we hit a log jam, and our only choice was to go ashore and carry the boat around the debris. There was one problem. We couldn't actually get out of the river. As mentioned, the river wall was 10 feet high, and our only choice was to go back up the river a couple of 100 feet to a low spot and carry it all the way around. Now I was really dreading getting out of the river. It's dangerous enough walking down the riverbanks in the pitch blackness, and I didn't need a zombie, banshee, or serial killer making it worse. So, we turned the boat around and headed back towards the sound. We pulled the boat out of the river, and the sound just stopped. This was it. It was definitely a serial killer taunting us, and now that we were out of the water, he was moving in for the kill. There was no more acting manly and unafraid. My friend knew I was freaked out, and I'm sure that he was too. The boat was usually kind of heavy, but tonight it felt lighter than ever. We practically jogged that thing down the muddy banks. Everywhere we looked, we saw what was ducking behind a tree and staying out of the light from our flashlights. We finally got past the log jam, put the boat back in the river, and whatever was following us was right behind us and in the boat. My friend got in. He pushed us off, out into the river, and ran around and yelled into the darkness, "What do you want?" We got back on the boat in the river, and the noise had suddenly stopped. We were both ready to go home. We ran the motor until we got to a bridge. My friend called his girlfriend and got her to come pick us up 2 hours earlier than expected. She asked why we cut the trip short, and he made up some excuse about the river being too shallow and blocked up with debris because neither of us wanted to admit that we were grown-ass men being scared of the dark. I never told anyone else I know about this, and I don't think he has either. We still mimic the sound every now and then, and any strange noise is instantly referred to as a zombie banshee. About 10 years ago, I would have been in my early 20s. Me and 2 of my friends decided one night to head down some train tracks and break into an old abandoned coal mine on the outskirts of town. My friend had been there a week before exploring with a buddy, so he climbed through a hole in the fence. They had cut this place was pitch black, and I had no experience with mining yards, so I could only imagine what these giant looming towers and silos were all around us. I could just barely make out these darker patches that were giant doors and holes in the structure and hear scuttling noises beyond. These noises could easily be explained as pigeons or bats, so we were not too fazed. We continued to our destination. We knew that our town was surrounded by old World War II forts and bunkers, and there was one on a hill in the middle of the mine yard. As we slowly crept towards our goal, I kept hearing a small tapping noise. Not too alarming, just a small tick-tick-tick coming from the dark behind us, in the direction we had come. We make it to the base of the hill that holds the bunker and find some way to sneak around the only pole light in the yard and up the hill. The whole time we hear the soft tink-tink-tink behind us. Having made it up the hill and faced with the option to head into the bunker, us brave men decide to pass. It was a little too creepy for us with no lights to find our way in or out. Instead, we decide to head around back, and this is where things get interesting. We find ourselves standing around a hole with a ladder leading down to a lower level on the bunkers, with that relentless tink-tink-tink coming from somewhere out in the shadows. Now, on 2 sides of us are the steep drop-offs of the hill. On the other sides are the walls of the bunker. We were boxed in on all sides with only a small path leading out, and with the hole and ladder in the ground at our feet. So, we decide this is a good place as any to light a joint, and so I break it out with my back to the drop of the hill a few feet behind me, and the hole directly at my feet. I try to light it on top of a hill without much cover from the wind, and have a difficult time getting the joint lit, and I'm growing frustrated, not to mention that the tink-tink-tink is starting to get annoying. Up until this point, I assumed it was a metal sign hanging on the fence we climbed through, gently blowing in the wind, and so ignored it. Frustrated with the joint and getting annoyed with the sound, I turned around and stared in its direction. I asked my friends what they thought it was, and tried again to light the joint. At this time, I was facing the noise. I did not try to conceal the flame. As soon as the lighter flashed, the noise changed from a soft tink-tink-tink into a thunderous boom. "Oh shit, security guards," was the first thing to pop into my head. That booming noise, them running down metal stairs in one of the dark towers. They saw my face when the lighter's fire illuminated me, and they must be on their way. All 3 of us crouched halfway between flight and fight, unsure if we should run, hide, or do nothing. We all decide to wait. It's too dark for them to find us easily, and they're so loud that we'll hear them the minute they get close. Boom! The noise just won't stop, and I swear it's getting louder. How long are those stairs? I think. This is weird, and I swear I hear movement in the grass in the darkness at the bottom of the hill. We all agree it was probably just the wind in the grass, but decide it was time to sneak our way out of this place. Slowly crouching through the dark, we move through the mining yard towards our exit when we run into a problem. Whatever is making the noise is between us and the exit. We squat down in the middle of an open gravel road to try figuring out our next move. Safe and thought it was just too dark for anyone to see us sitting there in the dirt. But just to be sure, we picked a spot that placed a large chain link fence between us and that god-awful boom boom boom. Now at this point, I decided to upgrade the guards to cops in my mind, and I was becoming a bit antsy, but we decided to wait them out. I guess at this point we all realized that none of this is making any sense. The guards or cops should have reached the bottom of the stairs by now. And that's when it got even weirder. With the boom in front of us and nothing to do but wait if we wanted to use our only known exit, we start to hear something else in the dark all around us, but somewhere close in on the same gravel we're crouching on. Things start to move. There was a thud noise, and then a slow scraping noise, as something was dragged across the gravel. Then again from elsewhere, quiet but very close. These noises were all around us. Thuds, then a slow dragging across gravel. We could not really pinpoint which direction they were coming from. At this point, I go from a rational adult to scared kid and think of all the people who died at this mine, or what could be living in those tunnels. In my mind, the noise went from guards to police to shot past ghosts, and is now smack dab in the middle of goblin and giant rat. Of course, we have to get the hell out of there and decide to climb the fence behind the mine. Running into the woods and making our way into the highway is our only option. And so, we pick our butts up out of the dirt and sneak as fast as we can the hell out of there. We're making it. The noises are now behind us and not getting any closer, and we find rows and rows of empty coal train cars. Perfect. We can walk freely between them with no chance of being spotted from a distance. With the end of the mine yard close by and with the protection of the train cars, we relax a bit and talk in a less hushed whisper. I guess that was a mistake. A few seconds after entering the rows of train cars, the first car explodes in a boom noise. Whatever was making that booming noise was right behind us, only feet away. I have never in my life, nor I ever, I'm sure, moved so swiftly again. The hundreds of feet between me and the fence to the outside world flew by, and I still do not understand how I got over the 10-foot fence so easily. I just remember leaping off it into the dark. We made it into the road and headed back to town. The roads bend around the mine, and we could still hear the relentless boom of something smashing that train. My friends got too uncomfortable talking about it, and seemed content to forget anything weird ever happened. But my curiosity drives me nuts, and I've gone back there a few times over the years. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened, and the last time I went back by myself, everything was torn down and taken away. When I was around 13, I went camping with my Girl Scout troop. This wasn't uncommon for us as we camped often, at least twice a year. The only difference was that my troop had the privilege to camp out 2 nights in a cabin. The cabins were not big. I was 5 feet tall, and if I were to lay down widthwise, we only had about 3 feet of walking space between the bunks. Each side had 2 sets of bunk beds, so there were 8 beds in each cabin, and there were 4 cabins. We had a large troop, so we occupied 3 cabins, including the moms who stayed the night with us. During the day, we went on activities as normal. Other troops came to spend the day, and we did knots, crafts, archery, and other sports-like events. This ended around 7 when all the other girls went home. Around this time, we cooked dinner, ate, and started a fire. We sat around and had girl talk like normal, ate doughboys and marshmallows until 9 o'clock when we had to go to bed due to the camp's curfew. In my cabin, I had my 2 best friends, one in the bed below me and the other in the bunk across from me. We had bunks that were closest to the window. To imagine the cabin, just imagine a rectangle with walls and a screen door. Now go into the screen door and I'll guide you. There are, as I said, 4 bunks under each end of the corridor or window. My mom was sleeping in the cabin across the way with my troop leader and the other moms. Soon, we were all asleep. My friend Lisa, who was below me, isn't very good at sleeping outside, so she was soon awake and sitting on the edge of my bunk, poking me. I cracked my eyes open and shone my flashlight at Lisa and at Atara, who was sitting across the way. She was awake as well. Since we weren't technically allowed to be awake unless we were using the bathroom, we decided to go get my mom, who would take us through the trail to the bathroom just to let Lisa catch a breather. By now, the fire was basically out, and we had my flashlight as our light source. So we bundled up because New England is freezing at night, even if it's spring. As we were getting dressed, I put my flashlight in my mouth so I could use both hands. but out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow. I thought it was my own, and camp was playing tricks on me, but I looked anyway. My scream may have broken all the rules in camp about curfew. My entire cabin was up, my friends were screaming, and my mom and my leader were trampling over each other to get into the cabin. When I turned to look at the shadow, I saw what was actually a man staring through the window. I don't know how long he was there for, and when I started screaming, he took off. My troop leader talked to the ranger the next day, and he said that he would talk to the night ranger. But we never got any other answers other than maybe it was an animal. Either way, we never went camping there again, and this incident still haunts me to this day. So creepy pervy, man. Let's not meet again. This was 5 years ago. My good friends and I were about 15 years of age, doing what kids do. We snuck out every weekend and had older friends in high school to drive us places. In this particular situation, we decided to check out this 8th floor abandoned hospital 10 minutes away from our city. It was 8 a.m., and one of the worst winters in Michigan we had seen in the past 12 years. It was at least -15 with wind chill because the hospital was less than 200 feet from the Detroit River. So, my friends and I arrived, trying not to draw attention because we didn't want police attention. We jumped a 6-foot brick wall, only to fall into the courtyard, which had easily 5 feet of unshoveled snow. So we trudged through it to the only entrance of the hospital, which is a back door with a staircase that goes up and down to the basement. Every other door was chained or barricaded, so we made entry and immediately saw satanic worshipping symbols on the walls in red spray paint. There was some type of sacrificed animal, which was far too mutilated to even tell what it was, but judging by the size, I'd guess it could have been a small dog. At this point, my 4 friends and I were disgusted, horrified, and a little bit pissed off. 2 of my friends go down to the basement while me and the other 2 go upstairs, flashlights in tote. We all kept seeing silhouettes moving across the hallway in front of us, but always from a distance, so we brushed it off for the moment. But then we had a medical desk tip over in the room down the hall from us, which sent items flying out of the room into the hall. We ran so fast, not knowing if it was a bomb or a demon. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, my other 2 friends in the basement of the hospital had found the room where they stored all the hospital beds and swore that something was thrown right at them. They were certain they found the morgue, and they just had to check it out because there was something that they had to see. So as we moved down the stairs, I kept hearing faint singing, but as if it were a little girl. So I kept thinking my friend behind me was being a smartass. "Stop it, John. Thought it was you," he replies. So we stopped in unison, and all of us hear what sounds like a little girl humming a song, but it wasn't further than a few flights of stairs above us. We all said, "Screw it," ran out of the building, hopped the wall, and left. Since then, we have tried to return, but they have picked up police patrols in the area, so it would have been far too risky. Hey there, hope you enjoyed these stories. If you can, please like and subscribe. I would appreciate it. See you next time.